Hi, my name is Bobby, and today we are making my favorite bag at the moment, which is the Casper bag. This video is meant to be an accompaniment to the written instructions, so if you're a visual learner, this is for you, and I'm going to go through all the steps with you. But before we get started, I want to talk about the bag just a little bit. This is the Casper bag. It has these beautiful long shoulder straps, so it's not going to fall off your shoulder, and they can carry so much weight. And behind every strap, we have these keychain loops, so you don't have to worry about your keychains falling up your strap whenever you're picking your bag up. It also has a zipper that goes all the way down to the very edge. So when you're opening your bag, you have tons of room, and we have these side gussets so it doesn't just fly open, but it gives you that extra space you need to grab all your goodies. On the inside of the bag, we have a technology pocket for your iPad or your laptop, and we have two slip pockets here for whatever else you might need. On the other side, we have a zipper pocket, which you do have to do because this is how we're going to turn the bag inside out later. These pockets are optional, so if you don't want to do them, you don't have to. But if you do want to do them, I have all your bases covered, and I'm going to show you how to do every single thing today in this video. I want to talk a little bit about fabric. So for this bag, I am using a lightweight canvas paired with a fusible fleece. If you are using something else, such as Pellex or fusible foam or quilt batting, just make sure you adhere it however it tells you on the directions for whatever batting or stabilizer or interfacing that you purchased, because they're all different. If yours is not fusible, I would definitely recommend to use a basting spray, something like this, which is just a temporary adhesive so your fabric stays in place and doesn't move while you're working with it. This is probably one of my favorite fabric combinations, but you can use virtually any woven fabric. However, if you're a beginner, I do recommend this combination of a lightweight canvas and a fusible fleece. It's a little bit lighter weight and it's easier to work on because you do have to keep in mind you are going to be sewing through quite a few layers during this project. Depending up to your preference, you can use anything from quilt batting to upholstery fabric. If you are using something like an upholstery fabric, you do not need a stabilizer or an interfacing because it's already going to have that structure on its own. So keep that in mind when you're choosing your fabrics. Before you choose your final fabric, I do recommend to take swatches and see how they work together and see if that's the kind of structure that you want, because different combinations will heed different results. I am so excited to finally have this pattern out for you guys. A big thank you to my team that helped me format all of the instructions. Sam and Maddie, you guys rock. And another shout out to my pattern testers. You guys are amazing and really helped me bring this together. Without me rambling on, let's make the Casper bag. Starting with our shoulder straps and keychain loops, we're going to lay our pattern pieces flat and iron any wrinkles out. We're then going to take our shoulder strap pattern piece and fold it in half and then press that down. When pressing, make sure your edges line up so everything can be as even as possible later. After that, we're going to lay it flat one more time and fold those edges to the center seam that you just created, pressing them down. Once those are pressed, we're going to fold in half again, taking those edges and folding them over onto each other and pressing one more time. I like to pin everything in place at this step because this is where we're going to end up sewing. Your strap should now be about 1/3 of the original width of the pattern piece. We're then going to repeat these steps for all shoulder straps and keychain loops, and then we're going to sew along all the edges with a 1/8 inch seam allowance. When I'm sewing the strap, I like to start at one end and sew all the way down with that 1/8 inch seam allowance. And then when I get to the other end, you see I just lift up my foot and turn it horizontally, put the foot back down, sew a few stitches along that short edge, and then put my foot back up and flip it so I'm sewing parallel to that long seam that I just sewed. I then just sew all the way down that strap again with that 1/8 inch seam allowance until I get to the other edge. When you're sewing, make sure you're back stitching, and when it's done, it should look something like this. I'm then going to repeat the same steps for all the shoulder straps and the 4 keychain loops, and they should all look something like this when you're finished. We're then just going to set them to the side and start on the side panel. I'm not going to take my side panel interfacing and my side panel main fabric without the U-shaped cutouts. I'm using fusible fleece here, so I'm just going to adhere them together according to the instructions using my iron. We're going to repeat this step for both of our side panels without the U cutout. We're now going to place those to the side and take the outer side panel piece with the U cutout and place the front facing piece on top, right sides together, making sure to line up both U-shaped cutouts. We're going to pin these together and sew along the edge of the U cutout with a 1/8 inch seam allowance. Remember, if you have scrap fabric, it's perfect to use it for this portion because you're not going to see the side panel facing when this is done. When I sew this, I like to start really, really slow. Again, make sure you're back stitching. I start sewing normal, and then when I get to that U shape at the very bottom, I like to hand wind my machine so I can make sure that I'm getting the shape perfectly. If you do it without hand winding, it is a lot harder to get that perfect U shape, so just keep this in mind when you're sewing. Once you've finished that, we are going to cut notches into the seam allowance, being careful not to cut into the seam that you just sewed. Once you've cut the notches in all four of those U shapes, we're going to take the front facing and flip it to the wrong side of the side panel. Your right side should now be facing out. We're going to press this down on all four of those U cutouts, and we're going to top stitch along that U shape with a 1/8 inch seam allowance. When I'm top stitching, I'm going to use the same technique that I did before on that U shape. Again, just starting to sew normal with that back stitch. And once we get to the bottom of that U shape, I'm going to hand crank my machine to get the perfect shape for the U outline. We are going to see this stitch on the final version of the bag, so make sure to go very slow and just pay really close attention to what you're sewing. Once all four of those U-shapes are top stitched, it should look something like this. We're now going to take that finished panel with the U cutouts and place it on top of our side panel piece with no cutouts. We're then going to mark those U cutouts onto the bottom side panel piece with our chalk. Make sure you do this on both side panel pieces. Then take a keychain loop piece and a shoulder strap piece. Fold that keychain loop piece in half lengthwise. Place it in the middle of the U shape that you traced in the previous step. Make sure to line up the top folded edge of that keychain piece with the top edge of the side panel. And then we're going to mark our straps. I'm going to take my second strap and mark where I marked that first strap just to make sure everything ends up being the same length. I am then going to pin everything in place and then sew along both edges of those shoulder straps starting at the bottom of that U shape that we just traced. Once you sew all along those edges and you make it back up to the top, we're going to sew an X inside of a box. This is going to make sure that the straps can hold a good amount of weight when your bag is finished. Once you have those both sewn down and you have your other side panel strap and keychain loop sewed down as well, we're going to take that side panel piece with the straps and the keychain loops, and we're going to place the side panel piece with those U cutouts on top, just making sure everything is lined up. Those straps and keychain loops should peek through that U cutout shape that you have. I'm then just going to pin everything in place, and I'm going to base stitch around all of the edges with a 1/4 inch seam allowance, making sure to skip over those top of those U shapes. So you don't want to sew down the strap or the keychain loop. Skip over those as you're basting together. Now grab your bottom panel, and if you need stabilizer or interfacing for this, go ahead and adhere that together because we're now going to take our bottom panel and place it right sides together with that side panel that we just finished. I'm going to now pin these in place, and then I'm just going to sew along that bottom edge with my 1/2 inch seam allowance. Make sure that you line up those middle notches when you're pinning everything in place, and when it's finished, it should look something like this. We're now going to repeat the same steps and attach that bottom panel to the other side panel Again, sewing along that bottom edge with our 1/2 inch seam allowance, and now your outer shell should look something like this when it's finished. We're now going to move on to our zipper panel and our gussets. So first we need to put our gussets together. I'm going to take one of my main fabric and one of my lining fabric, pin them together right sides together, and then I'm going to stitch along that long top edge with my 1/4 inch seam allowance. Once you've stitched that, I'm going to open and press my seams to one side. I'm then going to flip so that my seam is now hidden and my right side should now be facing out. Press again and pin in place. We're now going to top stitch at 1/8 inch seam allowance, and then we're going to sew that bottom edge with 1/4 inch seam allowance. We're now moving on to the zipper panel construction. Now, using our zipper strip pieces, we're going to place the main fabric right side up, open up the zipper and place it on top of the main fabric edge face down. So the teeth of the zipper should be facing the inside of your fabric. We're then going to place the gusset main fabric face down on top of both of those. And we need to make sure we line up that notch with the top of the gusset. We're then going to take the lining fabric, again, making sure we line up the notch with the top of the gusset and place that right side face down on top of everything, so we should have a sandwich. We're going to pin that in place, and when we get to the other end, we're going to repeat the same steps, adding in the gusset. Again, main fabric right side up, zipper face down, and then gusset main fabric face down on top, aligning the notch with the top of the gusset. We're then going to put the lining fabric right side face down on top of that and pin it in place, and this is what it should look like when you're done. I'm then just going to sew along the edge. Make sure you change your foot to a zipper foot. So we're sewing along the edge. Make sure you are back stitching at the beginning and the end of this. Once it's done, it should look something like this. Open it up and make sure everything looks correct. We're then going to repeat those same exact steps for the other side of the zipper. So we're going to take our main fabric, place it right side up, put the zipper on top of that, face down, and then we're going to put the gusset main fabric face down, aligning the top of the gusset with those notches on the bottom of the zipper strip. So I'm going to show you how to do this one more time. Pay very close attention because it can be a little bit confusing. Just make sure once you have everything pinned in place, you're opening it up to make sure everything is sandwiched in the correct way. So again, we're just pinning and then we're going to repeat the same steps for both edges of the gusset. And then we're going to use our zipper foot to sew along the zipper as close as possible, making sure to backstitch, and this will be what it looks like when it's completely put together. So when you're done with that, we're going to go ahead and press everything into place and pin our edges so that we can top stitch along the side of the zipper. I'm going to top stitch with a 1/8 inch seam allowance. Make sure to fold your gussets out of the way when you're doing this because you do not want to sew those down. And it should look something like this when you have it all top stitched. Just to know, if your ends aren't lined up completely correctly, like mine right here, it's totally fine. There's extra seam allowance added into the pattern, so if this happens, you're totally fine. We're just gonna trim off the excess. I like to take the extra time and pin my zipper strip to the side panel so I can see just how much I need to cut off. Also, I typically don't do this, but if you're a beginner, you'll see that your sides are still open on the outside of your zipper panel now. If you're a beginner, I do recommend basting the edges. This is just going to help you when you do need to connect this part to the side panels, so you don't have to mess around with so much fabric. I definitely recommend taking the extra step right now to go ahead and baste just the edge of this. I would say do it with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Our seam allowance is going to be in 1/2 inch, so it will still be hidden at the end of this. This is what that looks like. So your edges are now secured together, and then this is the side where it's not basted together. I'm now going to take the outer shell that I have constructed and I'm going to place the finished zipper panel on top of that bottom panel, right sides together, making sure that I center that zipper and I have my seam allowance left out on both sides to attach to the side panels. I'm then just going to pin that in place and sew along that bottom panel edge with our 1/2 inch seam allowance. Once I have that all in place, it looks like this, and yours should too. We are then just going to take that zipper panel and we're going to attach one side to one of the side panels, making sure to fold those keychain loops and shoulder strap out of the way so we don't accidentally sew it. I start by placing my middle markers together and pinning that in place, and then I go ahead and pin all the way the rest around the side panel. Once that's all pinned in place, it looks something like this, and then I'm going to go in and sew the edges all around with my 1/2 inch seam allowance. When you're sewing, be very careful to make sure those shoulder straps and keychain loops are out of the way. And when you get to the corners, just go very slow and make sure your fabric is in place because they can be a little finicky to sew. Once that's all sewn, it looks like this. And we're just going to repeat the same step for the other side panel, pin everything in place, sew it with our 1/2 inch seam allowance, and then we're going to have one part open at the end of this. So make sure your zipper is open, and we're going to sew down our bottom panel to the other edge of the zipper panel. You'll see right here that that's the only spot that's still left open. And I do have some extra fabric here, so I just cut that off and then I'm pinning it in place, again, sewing with that 1/2 inch seam allowance. When it's done, it's going to look something like this. I'm just going to fold it right side out and make sure everything is looking correct and I don't need to fix anything. And this is how your bag should be looking too. And now our outer shell is completely constructed. Now that that is fully constructed, we're moving on to our lining. I'm going to take my lining side panel piece and my zipper pocket piece. I'm going to place my side panel piece face up, and I'm going to place my zipper pocket piece completely open on top of that, right sides together. And I'm going to place it about 2 inches down from the top of the side panel to the top of where we marked our rectangle. I'm going to pin that in place, and then we're going to sew around that rectangle that we already marked. When we're sewing, just go slow and make sure you're sewing on that rectangle because that's going to be where we put our zipper. Now I am going to take my scissors and I'm going to cut down that center line that we drew, starting at the tip of those triangles into the tip of the next triangle. I'm then going to cut those two sides of the triangle, not touching the side that we sewed. Once those are cut, I'm going to fold that into itself and push it to the back of the side panel. I'm then going to press everything in place, and once that's pressed, we're just going to place our zipper behind and pin in place. When you're doing this, make sure that your zipper tab is visible because you don't want to sew that onto the outside and not be able to use your zipper. We're then going to sew around, sewing that zipper in place. Again, we're going to switch to a zipper foot, and I just like to sew as close to the fabric and zipper as I can. Once that is sewn down, you have a working zipper, and I'm just going to trim off the excess. I'm then going to fold that zipper piece back down onto itself and only sew close those two sides. I'm going to leave that bottom edge open because this is how we're going to turn our bag right side out later. We are now going to work on our technology pocket. We're going to fold it in half lengthwise with our right sides together and press. We're then going to sew that bottom edge with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Once that's sewn, we're going to turn it back right side out. So again, your right side of your fabric should now be facing out. We're going to press that one more time, and then we're going to top stitch the edge with a 1/8 inch seam allowance. If you're not doing the technology pocket, don't worry. You're going to do the divided pocket lining steps straight on top of your lining side panel piece instead of on top of the technology pocket. For the divided pocket lining, we're going to take the same steps, fold it in half lengthwise, right sides together, and sew along that bottom open edge with a 1/4 inch seam allowance, then turn it inside out and press. And then we're going to go back in and top stitch the edge one more time with a 1/8 inch seam allowance. Once that's top stitched, we are going to go ahead and place that divided pocket lining on top of our technology pocket. Again, if you're not doing the technology pocket, just place it straight on top of your lining side panel piece. Now we are going to line this up with the bottom edge and pin in place. Once pinned in place, we are going to sew along those 3 edges, and then we are going to sew down the center to create 2 pockets. You can also sew wherever you want and create custom pockets for your pens, your pencils, your chapsticks, your Kindle, your notebooks, whatever you want. This is just the basic way to do it. And when it's finished, it should look something like this. Now we're going to take our side panel lining piece without the zipper and place what we just finished on top. Now we're going to sew along those sides again to attach with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. When that's done, it should look something like this. You have your technology pocket and then your divided pockets on top of that. Again, you do not have to do these pockets at all if you don't want to. We are then going to take our lining bottom panel piece and line it up with the bottom edge of the side panel piece, and then sew along that bottom edge with a 1/2 inch seam allowance. It should look something like this when you're done. Press it so it's nice and ready to go for the rest of the bag. We are now going to take our outer shell and turn it inside out. Pay close attention because this can be confusing if you're a beginner. I'm going to take my zipper pocket side panel and line my center notches and place them right sides together. Again, watch this video on how I do it because it can be a little confusing if you've never constructed a bag before or if you're a beginner. I'm then going to pin it in place and sew all the way around with our 1/2 inch seam allowance. On this, I like to start at the middle and work my way to the edge, and then do the same thing on the other side. When it's done, I'm going to turn it inside out so I can see how everything is looking, and this is what it should look like. Make sure you do not sew those straps, make sure they're out of the way, and we're going to repeat the same process for our other lining piece again. I then like to trim my edges and cut a few notches. This just helps everything lay better and fold better since we have those curved edges. And then I'm going to attach my bottom panel lining piece to my bottom panel outer shell piece, right sides together, and pin and sew with the 1/2 inch seam allowance, and do the same on the other side. Once that's done, I'm going to attach my open side of the bottom panel and my side panel, right sides together, and sew in place. Now your bag's going to look a little bit crazy like this, but it's okay, don't panic. You're going to have that opening from your little zipper pocket still, and we're going to use that to reach inside and carefully turn everything back right side out. Be careful with this. You don't want to rip your zipper pocket. It just takes a second, but once it's done, it looks like this. And then we just take our zipper pocket out. I like to fold my edges in so there's no raw edge. And then I just carefully pin that in place. And then I'm going to sew again with about a 1/4 inch seam allowance. And once you have sewn that, you just push it back in the pocket, zip it up, and your bag is done.